I'm more interested in zooplankton and aquatic insects than owls, but I have friends who involve me in these projects, and then they retire and say, okay, Potter, you can kind of take over. So this started back, a friend of mine, Mike Shannon, who's worked for Audubon in Connecticut, for instance, wanted to go to the Maine Cooperative Owl Survey training project way back in the spring of 2002. And he asked me if I would come along, and I said no. And he said, well, I don't want to drive myself, come along. And finally we went. And we went through the training at Maine Audubon. And Mike and I established a route. A couple of young women at Unity established another one of their Cooperative Owl Survey routes. And we ran those 3 times a year for a 2-year period, sometime between 7 in the evening and 5 in the morning between January and the end of April. And that was an initial project. Murray Carpenter, who's sitting over there by the speaker, was involved in this as well, I think from the very first year. Steve was talking about Arctic bird sampling, and he had daylight, not very comfortable daylight, but at least daylight all the way along. And I think what we find, Murray will agree with me on this, is that sampling at night adds a whole different component. Sampling on cold nights is a different component. We used to play with tapes. I've been out with the tapes under my jacket, under my armpit to keep them warm so I could swap tapes into the tape player from station to station to get some good data. So I play a couple of roles at Unity College. Right now I'm temporary coordinator for what's now become the Maine Owl Monitoring Program, because Maine Audubon had no money last year, and Maine Department of Inland Fish and Wildlife stepped back with changes in the economy. So this is now, I guess I'm not going to get any sound out of that, but that's okay. This is a barred owl, the same owl that Dale showed on his presentation. I've been doing this now for, 7 years? I believe I've seen 2 owls, and they were not close. And yet Dale goes out to Connecticut, and owls come in so he can take videos of them right up close. So I'm always intrigued by that. So this is one of the reports from the Maine Owl Monitoring Program. And I have only got some access to the Maine Owl Monitoring Program. When it was canceled last spring, one day I said, no, it was just announced that there would be no Maine Owl Monitoring Program for 2009. And I called Susan Gallo at Maine Audubon and said, I've got too much time and energy invested in this. I'm not going to let it just cancel. Is there something we can do? And she and Tom Hodgman at Inland Fish and Wildlife said, well, basically not. And I said, well, I'll try it for a year. And they said, okay. Actually, the project in 2009 started on March 6th. And I was given the information and the authority on March 8th. So I started behind, but managed over the course of March 8th through April 13 to get about 50 people involved. There are probably 200 field observers over the last several years that have been involved in the project. And this is some of the data that's online, summarized in 2007. And I'll show you a map a little bit later on, which is really where I want to go. There were some number of routes run each year. I'm up to 42 now for 2009. I don't have access to the 2008 data. A lot of the routes have owls, but certainly not all of the routes are the observers find owls. I went to a review session the first spring. It was May of 2002, I guess. And I'm going to point to this white-haired couple over here, because there was one group that said, we didn't hear any owls on our route. I was really intrigued by that, because we hear a lot of owls on our routes every year. We're in either we're good at it, we're faking the data, or there are really lots of owls in the Unity area. And this older group, long hair over their ears, and they were wearing hats inside. Well, put your hair over your ears and put your hat on, and go outside in the cold and try and hear owls, and you can't do it. I don't think you can do it. So I'm intrigued. I would like to be on everybody's route simultaneously and listen to the playbacks that they send out, and also hear what owls are responding. Many of these owls, and it depends on the route that you're on, many of these owls are middle distance or they're out on the edge of hearing. As much as anything, for those owls that are way out, you feel it. You get a cadence. You don't really hear a call, but you know what the cadence is. Hoo, 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 hoo. When you get that cadence, some owls will be right close, but very seldom. I would say in terms of distance, close, middle distance, and on the edge of hearing, maybe 10% of the birds are in that close category. 70 to 80% of the birds are in that middle distance where you can hear them nicely, but the cell phone might not pick them up that far out. And then the rest of the birds are out there in the far distance. I often have a group with me. I take undergraduates from Unity. So we're out, and I'll have 1 or 2 people that have been on a survey before, and 8 or 10 people that it's their first time. And somebody's taking the data, but we sit back in the van after we're all done. Okay, who heard what? And we'll go through, and most of the novices will not have heard any owls, even if they're close by. So there's a learning curve, there's a training curve, there's a personal sensory curve, and I'm getting a little bit older. I wonder how many more years I can do this. Am I going to miss those owls at that far distance? And my counts will be down in the single digits rather than being as high as 23 birds on a 10-stop survey, for instance. So lots of components here, and this is data that was summarized by Audubon. If I don't lose this, here's another interpretation of that, just the number of owls per root, which may give us some indication of population density. This is a group of birders who were recruited either because they're members of Maine Audubon or they saw some media articles in the newspaper. They may have heard it from a friend. There was not a lot of publicity, and it's not an easy project to find. So this doesn't say how many roots are here. We're out 13 minutes for a survey stop. Listen passively for 3 minutes. Play, let's say, a saw-whet owl call for 20 seconds. Listen for, what, Murray, 3 minutes for saw-whets? Or long ears, depending on the survey that you're on. Play 20 seconds of barred owl call. Listen for 6 minutes, because there's good literature to suggest that barred owls don't respond as quickly as some of the other species. And then play great horned owl call for 20 seconds and listen to the end of that 13-minute interval. Write your data, hop in your car, run to the next stop, which is supposed to be at least 2.6 kilometers away, or excuse me, 1.6 kilometers away, and then repeat the whole thing. We used to do 8 stops a night on a route. I was cold by the end of 8 stops. And they added 2 stops. Reduced the time by a couple of minutes, but added 2 stops. And anybody who's been out will tell you those last 2 stops, it's cold. Even on a nice warm night in April when the frogs are calling, you're tired of this in that period. So let me see if I can scroll down one more time here to one more set of data. This suggests how the birds respond. And probably the most interesting one is barred owl, because during that passive listening period, a fairly high number of barred owls are detected. And then after the saw-whet owl or the long-eared owl call is played back into the field, that seems to shut down barred owls to some extent. For this next out to minute 6, and then you play barred owl calls and they start to respond, but you can see that the response curve is not, it's perhaps a little bit too immediate here, but it continues even out after we play great horned owl. Great horns are the biggest one. They perhaps are predators on barred owls and probably certainly predators on the small owls over here. So barred owls are responding to a variety of different features perhaps. Whereas the other species, you would think that long-eared owl or northern saw-whet owl would respond early in here, well, after we play their call. Not in here. 1, 2, 3 minutes is just passive listening. So there's some interesting things with the data going on. And this data actually represents, 2007. This is always the sequence of long-eared owl or saw-whet owl, then barred owl, then great horned owl at the end. And then the last piece I would like to show you, this is a map of the distribution of citizen scientists across the state. The project was originally proposed with 8 survey routes established in each of these Delorme Atlas page equivalents. And for instance, there would be 2 routes in the upper left corner, the northwest corner, 2 routes in the northeast corner, and so on around the configuration. Lots of the state have never been surveyed. This is a nice population, human population density distribution, as well as owl population density. So the Western Mountains and Aroostook County, Eastern Washington County, and surprisingly some places along the coast, but those may be islands, have not often been surveyed. So Portland's right down, I think Portland's on page number 6 in the atlas, for instance. So there's a lot of human activity around Portland with 13 routes or 17 routes just west of Portland run during this period, but not a lot of owls. Whereas Unity College is in block number 21, we have routes in 21, 22, and 14. A goodly number of surveys are conducted, but the number of owls per route is pretty high. And again, is there a component of our behavior, not perhaps so much of the owls? I think it's owls, but it may be that there are more owls in other parts of the state and they're not getting recorded as well by citizen science. There's been no training in this project since that first spring of 2002. And I can see that it's time a lot of new people have come in, people have dropped out. We're surveying the same locations, but perhaps with different years, for instance. So that's the main owl monitoring project. And then I came down here to a conference that Dale and Gloriana and others initiated 2.5 years ago. And Dale and I got talking, and Clifton Dazensow came to Unity College, summer of 2008, I guess it was, and did some work using Dale's system. And I can go on to the next page here. So this is the process. We play through a CD player. And the CD player with the barred owl call being projected should be audible out to 0.3 of a mile. And then the birds respond, perhaps the birds hear it beyond that distance. I'm satisfied. But you can see the mechanics of this. I don't know how Murray does it, but I flip out on some vehicles, I flip out the windshield wiper, and I use that as a prop for my CD player. Santiago and Dale and the Unity students have been out on tours with me. So it's an interesting event of the night. Start about midnight, finish about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, if everything goes right. Do the 10 stops, record. So as we started to work with Dale, I initiated a class. This is a saw-whet owl, the smallest one. And the class turned out to be 13 Unity undergrads who thought a sophomore level 2-credit course fit their schedule nicely. I don't know what other motivations there were. You might ask them and you'll find out something different. But they came in, and Dale and I had kind of designed the course ahead of time, and we thought about using Dale's high-tech devices and thought that with a group of undergrads, maybe there were some different places to go. So we wanted to know how cell phones operated from the citizen science perspective. If I recruited some community members, what would they have for equipment, and what would their knowledge base be? Then we wanted to learn some about owl behavior, either just general owl biology or perhaps with respect to this project, but not necessarily. And then how to put the data that we gathered together into the web server and make it available to citizen scientists. I'm convinced that for most citizen scientists, they respond well to immediately returned data. If they have to wait 6 months, 8 months, a year and a half, there will be some hardcore people that participate, but a lot of individuals lose interest. So I work with, I'm involved in several of the main state citizen science projects. I do the Cornell lab projects, I do Journey North, I do all kinds of things, and some of them have an immediate response. I enter the data, and by the time I go to the next page to see my data, it's already there and it's summarized. I'm not very good at loading the data to make it accessible, but I see how important that is to keep people engaged. So we started out, 13 students. The first day I said, how many of you have a cell phone? They all raised their hand. How many of you are willing to use it in class? They all raised their hand. How many of you are willing to leave it outside overnight? That wasn't so much enthusiasm. But we played around with that. And it's students, I don't have a cell phone. That question yesterday, who's got the gear? I still use a rotary dial on the wall phone at home. So why I'm here today is somewhat questionable, but history. Students are, they call, they receive calls, but they never bought the accessories. So finding the proper adapter to put in their cell phone to connect the microphone and connect the speaker to their cell phone or to other instrumentation, that took 6 weeks in one case. And we ordered stuff, and the cell phone company doesn't even send you the right instrumentation, for instance. So just making the hardwire connectivity through the phone was a problem. Once we got that, or just using the cell phones, we could talk to the server here at MIT and have it call back. There were people in our lab down the hall. Where's that owl coming from? Oh yeah, it's Potter's class. They're online today making all kinds of responses. We called people probably all across the country. One of our students has a learning disability, and he was our in-lab techie, and Peter would enter a number, but the phone in the field wouldn't pick up because Peter put in the digits in reverse order. So we're calling somebody in California whose their phone rings and here's an owl call coming through it, sort of thing. We don't really know where some of those calls went. But we got pretty good at using the server system here at MIT. We can have our phones play a recording that might go out to owls. We can put data in. We can do all those things from 13 phones, 5 different providers. One of the most difficult problems is that there's not very good access in central Maine. They put up 2 towers while we were conducting this class, and our cell phone accessibility improved. But when we go out on a survey route to actually use the cell phones, there are dead zones everywhere. I live in a dead zone. My 2 kids come home and they just put their cell phone down and they're not going to use it until they leave. Or they drive up to the top of the nearest hill and they can see all the way to Mount Washington, so there's like 300 towers out there. But in the little pocket we live in, there's nothing. And on most of these routes, there's no cell phone opportunity. So we're dealing with that kind of improvement. And then the owls don't necessarily respond. If I can go back for a minute to show you that one saw-whet owl. This one was brought in by an alum one morning at the end of February, and it had a band on it. So in terms of could we have anticipated getting a banded owl and learning a little bit about owl biology? Absolutely not. But this bird had been banded someplace in Connecticut. The report back from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service didn't say where. In the fall of 2007, probably as a young bird, turned out to be a male. Males are known to be somewhat more migratory than females. And it smacked into a window in Unity late in February of 2009. So it probably it was on its way back from its second southward migration. And then we did some dissections, and at noontime, Anthony Ryan's going to show you a video of some of this work. So here we've got a bird. That appears to be a featherless tract on the body. I don't really know owl feather tractness well enough, but that's just typical birdness. It's not because we've ripped into the flesh. So are we going to set up a system? Well, here's a system I set up. This is a little Western Rivers speaker that you can buy from Cabela's. There's my cell phone. It's actually a coin envelope. There's no cell phone there, but that's my weather protection connected to battery power, my son's motorcycle battery, connected to the omnidirectional microphone, connected to the speaker. And we got good enough so we can set up a system like this and it will operate. It will do all the kinds of things. Feedback becomes a problem, but the server allows some scheduling that allows us to get around feedback. A little kid's umbrella on a tripod to keep it reasonably dry. One of the nights we were out, it started to rain. and we can't hear either the recordings that we played out or any owls that responded, but we can hear raindrops on the speaker really nicely. And we woke up half the campus one night playing this. One of the students was going to come out, and we had a linear survey set up so we could know how far out we could get the cell phones to respond. We got this kid listening to his, watching TV to come out of the dorm because he heard us. And then he told the story about coming out of the dorm, and that's in the server as a little historical story because Eric was telling this with his phone on and recording the story. So the system works nicely. To get 50 or 100 main owl monitoring program people to take their cell phone and put it on one survey stop on a route and let it record while they run the rest of their route is my next step. Because I have lots of questions. I know that if I play a recording out and get an owl to respond, that sometimes a second bird will respond. And I don't hear beyond that, but does a third bird respond? And then a neighboring bird to that or to the others, and pretty soon I've got all the birds in unity calling and all the birds really calling across the map, potentially, because I prompted with an artificial playback call, a local owl to call. And I really want to know about that, and I think the cell phones and the recording devices have a capacity to answer those kinds of questions. The other night, my wife and I were reading, and we could hear owls outside, and there was a bird calling. I opened up the window, and there were two birds calling to my southeast, right close by, probably 30 meters away. And there were two more birds off to the southwest, two more birds a little bit out to the south, and I'm pretty sure a seventh bird farther away. Well, how do I know that there were 7 birds out there? Calls overlap. Calls have different cadence. Calls have different pitch. I can sense, Dale talked about my body language. I can sense that there are owls in different locations, so I turn towards them. Can the cell phone pick those up? The other night, the phones, I believe, would have recorded the 2 birds over here, and we would have been able to distinguish that there were 2 birds. It might have picked up the calls out here to the southwest. I don't think the cell phone would have audibly recorded those birds off to the south, but it might have picked up some signal that would be recorded electronically. And I think most people, most citizen science would have missed that 7th bird. And if I'd gone to the other side of my house, would I have heard more to the north? I didn't try that. But those birds called for almost 40 minutes. So I kept thinking, I really need to go downstairs and call the server and get some records on this, and then I didn't ever do that, and I may never get those calls back. So I think the system will work. We need to do more training, get some more systems operating. These are some of the sponsors. These are all the places that don't have money. MIT has some money to support my part of the project, and I guess NSF does. The budget for the class that we operated, and Rich and Anthony are sitting back there, my dean gave me $400. Dale gave me many more dollars worth of equipment to support that. We had a lot of fun, and we did answer those questions. How does the system work? How do the phones work? Do we get some more information about owl biology? Not necessarily through the system, but we added some information about owls. And then how can we put it together, and will it be successful? So I think that's another great horned owl. I'm going to stop right there. I have to double out of there.
Thank you very much, Dave Potter.